Yeah, that's about Unit 5 grammar, but vocabulary will also finish it this week. So that during recess, I'm sorry, I'm going to send out some lessons that you have to kind of go through. But some ideas I'll highlight a little bit during the lesson too, and give some examples because we are running behind schedule in a way. Yeah, that's all. Okay, you can hear me, right? Okay, because I think if you couldn't, somebody will say something. All right, now, last time we have spoken about other approaches that you can use when you are teaching grammar. But then for today's class, we're just going to focus on the one approach that we did not talk about in the last class, and this one is the lexical grammar, approach. And lexical grammar represents both lexis and grammar. And then lexis, I think you have done that in your English classes with the Department of Humanities or the school. Yeah, Department of Humanities when they were not named differently as they are today. And then lexis has everything to do with a complete set of all possible words in a language, or maybe they will subset them in terms of specific linguistic criteria. So it has everything to do with all the words that are in a language. And then grammar, on the other hand, is the way we arrange these words to make proper sentences. So here with this approach, they're just telling us that we cannot really separate, you cannot say, I'm just going to use the lexical approach or I'm just going to use the grammatical approach, but it's a combination of both because they are intertwined in some ways. All right. So from the view of grammatical structure, maybe lexically bound. So which means the grammatical structure that you're talking about, is from that list of words that a language has. All right. And then lexical items can also have grammatical features. So you cannot really separate the two of them. So you have to teach them together. There's a possibility of you teaching them together. All right. And we'll see an example of how this lexical grammar approach can be used within the classroom. And then they say that this approach is supported by Corpus research. I wonder if you know the term corpus. Have you heard of corpus before? Yes or no? Yes. All right, that's good. Oh, that's wonderful. So which means it's really not new to you, right? That's really great. So we have corpus research. Let's just say for those who don't know, let me see if I'm missing anything. Okay, with corpus research, which sometimes happens with corpus linguistic, it has corpus linguistic, for example, is the study of a language as that language is expressed in a text, which is now corpus, and plural is corpora, and it's a body of real-world text. All right. So corpus research is collection of language examples. This can be either written text or spoken text, and it looks into examples of words, sentences, phrases, or text, and then we have a number of corpora that has this set of text or language in context. All right, and here I'll show you just an example for those who don't know, but it sounds like most of you do, but I guess there are. Okay, for those who don't know, so here's an example of the British National Corpus. So what you do, let's say if a student is struggling with using a certain word. In this case, we have an example of boost here. So you enter the word boost, you search, and then it will give you options of this word used in context. So you'll see that we have boost here in this sentence, boost, 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 and then they can see how is this word used in context. All right. So that's what now corpus studies, offer the learners. So they get to see how this word is used in context. That's just to simplify that. in simple terms. And then here we have an example, but then I'll explain it in the next slide. This is an example of it's a sample of corpus-based lexical error worksheet, and they have used it in their study. So what is this about? So a sample activity in 19 is the one that we just saw now. 19.1 was used by these guys in their study in a composition class. So it has the writing class in an American university to help learners recognize lexical grammatical error in their own writing. And then the worksheet was provided for the learners to complete as shown in the sample, and learners then follow the procedures. So list the lexical grammatical problems that his or her instructor has marked. So which means that the learners have written their essays, and then the instructor, the teacher, the lecturer, then underlined some of the lexical grammatical problems that the learner has. Now, in the worksheet, they say you must list the problem, right? So here in the first part is a list of all the lexical grammatical errors that the learner had in their paper as marked by the instructor. And then number 2, and then find examples from an electronic corpus, either the British National Corpus, so this is now the British one, or the Corpus Contemporary American English, so which is based on the American English, that use each lexical grammar item in the desired way, and write one example down on the worksheet. So which means they go to their corpus, enter the word that they have an issue with, and then after they have entered, they copy a sentence in which that word has been used correctly. So they write it down on the worksheet so we can see. We go back. So here we have got examples. So the learner had an issue with contribute to, and then bored, boring, and then interested, interesting. So those are the lexical grammar items, problems that they have. And then here we have got some examples that they found, how they've used contribute to correctly, bored and boring correctly, interested and interesting, how they've used it correctly. So that's the example. Okay, and then next, then the student, or the learner rather, write their original sentences using the information learned from the corpus. So which means from this activity where they go to the corpus and then see how it's used correctly, they come back and then they write their own sentences, own sentences using the problem items that they have, but using it in a correct way. So the hope is that they have learned something, the new information that they've learned about how to use these lexical items correctly, and then they use and then they write their original sentences. So I think we can go back here. And then in this part, here is like they are describing how they are used correctly, and then they have to rewrite their own sentences, which I think I really like where you have to insert this part of, they need to describe, then how do you use this lexical item correctly? Then they have to explain. So here is where now you are raising also metalinguistic awareness, having them think about how this word is used correctly. And then afterwards, they write it in their own words in the correct way. So that's what we have there. And I have already told you that the lexical aspect problems that the student had or learner had was contribute to, and then bored and boring, interested and interesting, and then you saw that information in this worksheet. So that is now the lexical grammar approach and how you can use it in the classroom. Do you have questions? Any questions?
No, Miss.
No questions. Thank you, Regina. From Soins, okay, and Selma, no questions. It's very, very clear. So that's the approach. All right. Now we are going to look at the principles of teaching grammar together. And this is everything that we have spoken about basically in the past lessons. So the first one that we have is all the three dimensions of grammar. We have got form, meaning, use should be emphasized. All right, don't just focus on one, but always emphasize on three of them so that the learners know how does it look like, what does it mean, and then how do we use it in context. Take a lexical grammatical approach to present new linguistic items to students or learners in our case. And then here in the textbook that I said I will help you, I spoke to one of the technical assistant at UNAM, and then they say they will help me with sharing this textbook with you. And then you can see some examples of then how do you use lexical grammatical approach within your lesson. We just don't have that one example that we have looked at. We have other ways also for you to incorporate the lexical grammar approach. And then learners need to have an opportunity to practice and use forms in communicative tasks. So that is now to say that we just don't focus on a grammatical aspect, but we have to use it in context and in a communicative communicative activities or tasks that they need to do in a classroom, something that they are communicating in and through as they are using this grammatical or lexical item that you're focusing on. And then attend both to input-based and output-based grammar and vocabulary. That is to say, don't only look at the comprehension of what they understood, but they should also produce. They should produce language. They should give the, they should create sentences, their own sentences in a communicative manner in which they show that they really understood the grammatical or vocabulary item that is being focused on in the classroom. All right. So both understanding, comprehension, and also production. Deductive, inductive, and abductive approaches can also be useful depending on the goals and the emergent needs of the learner in a particular context. So you should use these approaches, often, not just focusing on one, but use them up. But then the determiner of when and how to use this is based on what is your objective really, and then the need of the students. But don't just use one. So use them, mix them up when you're teaching. And then the next one, incidental focus on form is valuable in that it treats errors that occur while learners are engaged in meaningful communication. Incidental, so which means that there is the aspect of you helping your learners focus on a certain form, that you need them to focus on, especially if they are making errors as they communicate. Then you help them focus on those errors. But again, we spoke about do not focus on an error while the student is communicating, because this impedes communication. It stops the communication. You want the communication to continue, but you should have strategies of when exactly to focus on the error and treat the error that the learner has made. Corrective feedback can facilitate acquisition if it's involved in a mixture of implicit and explicit feedback. So you've got implicit feedback whereby you don't really say, let's say if the student has made an error, you don't say it out straightforward saying this is an error, but you can, let's say, just restate what they've said, but with a correct form. All right. And then explicit, that's when you say, oh yeah, there's an error here, and this is how you change it, or you ask them, then how do you change this error when you have really given that feedback to the learners. And they say that both implicit and explicit feedback are important. You can use them by mixing them up. You don't always use one, but use them both because they help the learners acquire the language. And then next, explicit grammar lessons and implicit grammar integrated in the communicative activities are both viable depending on the context and the learner's needs. So that is to say that don't just focus on one way to teach grammar. Don't just go with implicit way of teaching grammar, but you can also do explicit lessons as well. And then again, depending on what the needs and the goals and the objective of a lesson is, then you decide which one to use, but always use them both. And then instruction needs to consider learners' individual differences, try to cater to their needs by involving a variety of learning activities, make use of learner training materials to help them be aware of their own approaches to learning, and encourage them to alternate different strategies. So again, we have spoken about variety. Why is it important to use variety in the classroom? Is because the learners have got different individual needs, and we want to cater to that. Don't just use one type of activity in the classroom, but use different types of activities in the classroom to help with the different learning styles and strategies that the learners have. But we do know that there are certain learners who prefer a certain learning strategy, but you have to encourage them to also learn about other ways to learn. And that is now when you come in by presenting different ways of learning as well. For instance, make them aware of the different strategies of like learning grammar, and then if they have one that they prefer, encourage them to also use other ways to learn. Okay. And then we have got incidental focus on form is valuable in that it treats errors that occur while the learners are engaged in meaningful communication. Wait, isn't that the same as this one? I'm like, oh, I've read that before. It's the same one as this one, so we are not saying that again. Oh, teacher Kawana. Next, wait, we've already spoken about all this. Okay, so we have already spoken about all this. We don't need to say that again. So I'm like, oh, I've seen all that before. So the last one that we haven't really spoken about much is this one. So encourage your learners to use language creatively rather than reproductively. That is just to say that encourage the learners now to use the grammatical aspect, because here I keep going back to grammatical and lexical items because this is the focus of this specific unit, but there's no but there. So that is to say, ask them to use language creatively. Don't just give them activities where you really control everything that they say. That type of way of doing activities or using language, it has a place in the classroom. You need to use that as well, but also encourage them to use the language in their own way, in a different context. All right, where they use language. Yes, exactly. As an example. Thank you very much, Soin. So you give them a different context or a different way to create their own poem, for example, but then they need to use the grammatical structure that you have taught them. So you're not controlling everything that they are doing with the grammatical structure that you are teaching them. And that is the end of the grammatical principles of teaching grammar, and a little bit of vocabulary and vocabulary, obviously. So that's what we have. Do you have questions so far? Any questions? Yes or no? Okay. No. Okay. Wonderful. Now we're going to look at the techniques that you can use in teaching grammar. So earlier we have looked at the approaches. Now we are looking at the techniques. I should ask you, what is the difference? What is the difference between grammar teaching approaches versus grammar teaching techniques. What is the difference?
You are now muted.
Okay, the question is, what is the difference between grammar teaching approaches versus grammar teaching techniques?
Are you waiting for the answer?
Oh, yes, I
You are
am.
now unmuted.
I'm waiting.
Oh.
Yes. I was muted and I was just talking to myself. Oh my gosh. Okay, so first, Claudius, we are going to look at Selma's answer, and Claudius goes, and then we look at Soin's answer, right? So everybody has an equal opportunity. So Selma says that she thinks that approaches are broader while techniques are simpler ways of teaching within an approach. Awesome answer. Thank you very much. Claudius, go.
Okay. The grammar approaches. It is basically teachings without, let me say, teaching without any corrections or so.
Okay.
So and techniques is where you look at now the mistakes and corrections and so.
Okay. Thank you for your contribution. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And then, okay, thank you. Then let's look at Soin. Okay, in general, techniques involves methods or ways that are not followed to solve something or reach a certain goal, while approaches have to do with the way to do something. Then we just add the word grammar to the definition. All right, good try. I like the another thinking. I mean, like, you really are thinking about this answer. Thank you very much for your contribution. I think somebody was also writing. Albertina, do you have more time? And please don't stop writing. Even if I give an answer, please don't stop. We'll come back to your contribution in any case. The answer that is most close to, closest now to the correct way of defining this, it will be Selma's, whereby, yes, approach is more of a broader way to look at grammar teaching. And to be more specific, it's they say it's a set of assumptions dealing with the nature of language, what people think the nature of language is like, and also what they think learning a language looks like, and how teaching should happen. So it's more broader of like, what is language? Then what does language involve? Like, when it comes to learning a language, what does that involve, or what does that look like? And then when it comes to teaching a language, specifically now for grammar, what does it look like? All right. And then after approaches, we have got techniques. Entails the ways of teaching grammar to learners. Teaching method is a systematic. Yes, and it's good that you brought up both Soin and Albertina. They both brought up method, and then sometimes they are used interchangeably with approaches. All right, methods and approaches. But generally, when we look at these terms, approach is the largest umbrella. All right, where they have all this assumption of what language is, and what does learning look like, and then what does teaching language look like. And then we've got methods. Methods here now is the presentation of this, is a system of presenting now whatever grammar that you're presenting within the classroom. And then the method is informed by the approach. All right. But then here in this specific lesson that we have here, approach is used in terms interchangeably as method. Here, how do you present a grammar lesson? All right. How do you present it in the classroom? As we have seen now, the lexical grammar, the implicit, explicit, excuse me, to mention just a few. All right. And then techniques are more specific. They are more specific, as somebody has mentioned, I think. Okay, let me just say what techniques are. Techniques are more specific activities that manifest manifest in the classroom. So it's the specific activities that you do in the classroom, and then they are very much in line with the approach as we have seen them. So approach is just like, how do you present this in the lesson? And then technique is the specific activities that they do in the classroom, as we will see some of the example in a little bit. Okay? So we have got a number of techniques that we're going to look at. We have got chart, objects, maps and drawings. But before we go to that, I just wanted to say thank you for everybody who have contributed, and I hope I have made that difference, the distinction between techniques and approach. And then as we talk about these techniques here, I think you have a better understanding, better comprehension of the difference between the approach and the technique. And then this, we have got, the first technique is chart, objects, maps, and drawings. And then the next one is dialogues and conversations. And then we've got input enhancement, input flood, input processing, and dictogloss. All right. So what do we have? How are we doing on time? I think we can go through that. Very fast. Okay, so we have the first one, which is chart, objects, maps, and drawing. Here we have been told a number of times throughout the lesson that some practices for calling learners' attention to grammatical form has been found for decades and still serves as effective devices. So we know that a number of them, and then especially the ones that we are looking at in this class, are regarded as some of the good techniques that you can use in the classroom, because they are effective to helping the learners learn grammar and vocabulary. So there's always a useful place for a chart. For example, there's that requires the learners to notice and check off certain forms. We have an example that we'll look at in a short bit. So 19.2 is the next slide. Likewise, so this is now a chart that we'll look at as an example, and we have got also objects. So when you teach grammar, you can use objects and maps and other illustration, anything that is visible for the learners to see and know what you're talking about. So objects could be also pictures of objects, to help them focus on whatever grammatical forms that are concrete and you want them to focus on. For example, let's say you are talking about articles of clothing, all right? And here we have got some examples of how then you use these objects, all right? And here we've got some example, and then they say, for example, could aid in the noticing of possessives. All right, so let's say you bring in the classroom either a picture or an actual picture of your own jacket, or a picture of a jacket, and then you say, this is my jacket. And then you are like pointing to yourself like, this is my jacket. And then maybe Oscar has glasses, or Oscar doesn't have glasses. And then you give a picture of glasses if Oscar doesn't have glasses. You give a picture of glasses to Oscar. And then you say, these are Oscar's glasses. Do you understand? Are these your shoes? And then let's say you have got Lucy sitting next to Emily, all right? And then you give Emily shoes, and then you give Lucy a handbag, all right? Because Emily and Lucy are sitting next to each other, you take Lucy's shoes. You are taking Emily's shoes, and then you ask Lucy. Or you ask, you take Emily's, you say, you give Emily a picture of a handbag, and then Lucy has shoes. All right, and then you take Lucy's shoes, and then you ask Emily, are these your shoes? And then Emily will answer, no, they are Lucy's. Do you understand? That is just an example of then how do you bring in objects to help the learners understand better grammatical form that you are teaching them. And I bet you come up with like brilliant ideas, if you know what I mean. I know you're creative, all right, and you are more exposed, I will look forward to seeing some of your examples that you will have. And then now talking about charts, so we have got, they mentioned something about charts. So we have got a chart here. What the learners will do in the classroom is read the paragraphs on page 98 again, and then choose the appropriate adverb frequency. So we have got a paragraph talking about Keiko and what she does and what's happening, right? And when they read the sentence, Keiko works hard, and then we have got now the adverb frequency. We have got never, seldom, sometimes, often, usually, always. And then when they read the paragraph, it will indicate which adverb speaks to how hard Keiko works. All right. Maybe it's not stated exactly that Keiko works hard, but maybe from the examples that they have on Keiko and how she works, it will indicate how often she works hard. Okay. And then they will tick always. She is on time for work. And then from that paragraph, it will indicate how often she comes, when she comes to work, all right? And then they will indicate sometimes or often or maybe always comes on time. She is late or sick, and then is she always late or sick? Maybe never or seldom, rarely, okay? And then they read the text and then they indicate the frequency of the adverbs. And then afterwards, they will be asked, now write the sentence, like rewrite these sentences, including the adverb of frequency. So for example, we have got Keiko always works hard, because they have ticked that. And then the next one, she is always on time for work, because they have ticked always. And then they write all these other sentences using the frequency within the sentence. Does that make sense? Is that clear? Oh, we're doing on time. Okay. Let's go. Is that clear? Yes or no? All right, good. And we are moving on to the other part is the maps. Maps are traditional favorite aids in, thank you so much. Maps are traditionally favorite aids in introducing and reinforcing certain grammatical and lexical features of language. Asking for direction, yes, because we also have in our syllabus, we have got a part where we have to talk about directions. And then they suggest that when you're teaching directions, what do you use? Maps, all right? So like directions, where is the post office? And then responding, go to, down this street, then right, walk about half a block. We don't use blocks much. And then it will be on your left, all right? And then are among a number of possible formal elements that can be included. So if you're teaching if you're teaching directions, please use maps, okay? And we'll see also the objectives that we have, objectives and competencies of grammar that we need to incorporate in our lessons. Next, we are talking about dialogues. Lord, how are we going to finish? Okay, dialogues and conversation. For half a century, dialogues have been successfully used to focus learners on form and meaning simultaneously. For beginners, they provide models for practice while interjecting some meaning and reality, even if all the lexical and grammatical components are not completely understood. Okay, so that's now to say that they always use dialogues when they are teaching. They are teaching grammatical or lexical items within the lessons. And for the advanced students, you don't have to give them language that they need to do. But then for the beginners, for example, because they might not have so much language, then you interject. You understand? Like you create a dialogue, fictitious dialogue, and then you put in the grammatical aspects that you want them to use. Even if they don't understand it, they have to repeat. Like, for example, at times they might need to memorize the dialogues and then they come and practice it. All right? And that's just an example. And then for intermediate learners, dialogues and other conversation give learners a chance to confidently produce their language. So intermediate and advanced students, then they can create their own language. They don't need they will not depend on you so much to provide them the language. All right. But then when they create their own conversations, all right, they need to use these grammatical or lexical items that you want them to focus on. All right, we are going over to Soin's point here. Instead of a map, a teacher can maybe transform the class into. You see, I told you, you guys are brilliant. Yeah, you come up with good idea. So instead of using a map, you can set up the classroom if it can allow you, if your class is not like too packed. All right, and then instead of using a map, learners can act the direction out while talking. Or are we just no, you're not. You can come up with anything that you think is brilliant as long as the learners use the language. All right, whatever that we present you in the classroom, this is not the end of it. There is more possibilities that you can use within your lesson. Okay. Thank you so much for that example. That's even better because we have students who are good at movement. So when they are moving like that, that's good also. Do you understand? They will learn better. All right, moving on. So we have got in a page 476 on figure 19.3. There's a conversation in present that is presented to the students. They can listen to it on audio recording or read it or repeat it to get the flow of the conversation. Practice it with a different partner and eventually at their level permits, expand on it to share their own vacation plans. And the focus is on present progressive used for future planned events. So here we're going to see an example. I hope that was clear. Oh no, I don't like that. Ache, chotto mate. Sorry. I don't know what happened. There was a picture that's supposed to show an example of a conversation that the learners will use in the classroom. And then here now they just suggested to you that they can either listen to it, or they can read it, or they can listen to it. They can listen to it on audio and then or read it and then repeat to get the flow. So which means, okay, you can have them read first to just acquaint themselves with the conversation, and then you have them listen to the conversation as they read it, and then they repeat to get the flow. And then after that, you have them have this conversation with a partner, and then again have them the same conversation with another partner. And then if they are able, at the level at which our students are, they can create their own their own conversation, talking about their own vacation plans. Do you understand? So that's just an example. But when I present, I hope when I put this PowerPoint on Moodle, the picture of this conversation will also be there to see an example. All right. The amount of repetition depends on how fast are they catching the pronunciation and how the conversation goes. But then if you have really advanced students, they can see the conversation as an example, and then you jump into them already creating their own conversation using the present progressive if that's what you're focusing on in the classroom. And then next we have got input enhancement. Input enhancement is a recently common technique involving highlighting. Right? Whatever grammatical aspect that you want them to focus on, you highlight it. You either boldface it, you italize it. It's all up to you to decide on how you highlight these aspects. And then so you highlight a certain target grammatical form in a reading text, or stressing, like you just don't, you highlight it either by bold facing it, or you can stress whatever grammatical aspect that you are focusing on by saying it slowly or using gesture to when you are speaking, for example. All right. So input enhancement, you are enhancing the grammatical or lexical item that you want them to focus on. You can do it when they are reading. You highlight, bold, italize, underline, whatever. And then when you're speaking and you want them to focus on that grammatical aspect, then you stress, put more emphasis on it when you're speaking. Or you can use your gesture as a way to focus on that aspect. Here we have got an example of an enhancement in writing. And then we have got now the enhanced aspects. And then we have got questions for discussion. And then, and then here it's just an oral of another type that you can use in the classroom. All right? And input enhancement is clear, right? Yes or no? Yes. Okay, we are moving on. Input flood. Okay, input flood is another technique that is another technique presents text that contain a target structure that appear frequently and repeatedly and is therefore more salient. This may trigger syntactic priming as a speaker tend to produce a previously spoken or heard structure. So here the idea of input flood is, you understand the term flood, isn't it? Flood, yes?
Yes.
Teachers, yes. Okay. And input is whatever that you present to them, is the content that you present to them, either spoken or either written. So which means that whatever grammatical structure that you want them to focus on, you give them a text with that structure presented often and repeatedly. All right, because it comes with the belief that, or the understanding that, the more you present this grammatical aspect to the learners, the more they absorb it, they catch it, they acquire it in the lesson. All right, I think that's just, it's very it's very clear how I explained it. So here we have got input flood activity of definite and indefinite articles. And then you can see here within this text, if you read it, and then you read it on your own, okay, you see that there's a use of the definite and indefinite articles used often and frequently within this text. All right, we have got there, here, some, there, there, the, how it's used, right, within a text. So that's just an example. I want us to finish the techniques before we leave for the next class. And that's the end of the lesson. Do you have questions? Any question? No questions. All right, thank you so much for coming. I will talk to you soon. Bye. Oh, bye. I was like, what is in here?
Okay, bye.
Bye.
See you.
Okay,
Bye.
see you. All right, see you.